Hello, friends. This is the AlphaList podcast. I am your host, Toby. The goal of the AlphaList podcast is to empower CTOs with the info and insight they need to make the best decisions for their company. We do this by hosting top thought leaders and picking their brains for insights into technical leadership and tech trends. If you believe in the power of accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. Plus, if you're an experienced CTO, you will love the discussion happening in our Slack space where over 600 CTOs are sharing insights, or visit one of our events. Just go to alphalist.com to apply. Welcome to the AlphaList podcast. I am your host, Toby, and today I have a founder with a huge history. It's Renaud Visage. He founded Eventbrite, bootstrapped it first, IPO'd it later, was in the supervisory board for ages, is now investor and working as a venture partner at Point9. And today we're here to talk about his learnings and his journey. So welcome, Renaud.
Thanks, Toby, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Was that a good introduction? Was that fair?
Yeah, that's a good summary.
Okay. Maybe we start with one of the or the thing I typically do with your personal journey as a nerd, as a geek, from zero to Eventbrite CTO. How did that work out?
So not in a direct way. I got my training as a civil engineer, so I was not destined to work on internet technologies. But I was, so I started my career as an environmental engineer. I was cleaning up polluted sites in San Francisco. I spent my last year of study in the US and stayed there afterwards. And that was the late 90s, so a great time for the internet revolution. I was looking at it from the outside and seeing all these great companies being founded and scaled to thousands of employees very quickly. And I got excited personally, excited about the power that an individual can have to create a destination that people can enjoy all around the world. And that seemed fascinating to me. So I started learning on the side. I was working on physical sites from 5 a.m. to 7 p.m. But after that, when I came home, I started reading books about the web technologies that were in place at the time. They were very simple compared to what exists now, but still you had to understand what a server was, how to configure it, how to write web pages, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all these cool technologies that were the basis of what the internet has become. And I did that more and more. I started doing it for my environmental consulting firm. I did a web layer on top of their accounting software because I needed that on a daily basis to run my projects. And then got better and better at it and started looking at all the data models that the accounting software had, which was very complex. But
data models.
Yeah, exactly. It was pre-web data models, very complex and tangled, and they had just a UI from a CD-ROM that you installed on computers.
Right.
So I thought we could do better, and that's what I did for my company. And then in 2000, I decided to become officially a software developer. So I took a job at the photo sharing startup. I love photography, so it was. I only had one interview. I took it as soon as I got it. It was perfect match, photography, web development, and it was quite a wild ride for my first startup. We were in the height of the .com, but right before the .com crash. So I saw everything from the inside as to how companies could get very quickly inflated and deflated as quickly when funding run dry.
Okay. Which language or tech stack did you get started with?
I started with ASP, which was Microsoft's
Really?
pre-C# type development environments. It was very script-based, no objects, very simple, but quite powerful. I created some personal websites as well, just for the fun of it. It was all about learning and creating interfaces that people could interact with.
Okay. And how did that lead to Eventbrite?
It led to Eventbrite because someone I was working with at the photo sharing site went on to work for the company that my co-founder at Eventbrite started before Eventbrite. It was called Zoom. It was a money remittance platform based on top of PayPal that allowed anyone to send money abroad, especially in countries where it was difficult to do so. And when Kevin, my co-founder, left Zoom, he asked around. He needed a technical founder to join him on the futurely named Eventbrite project. And then my friend recommended me. We had a chat. He was starting this with his girlfriend at the time. They had met a few months ago. And I joined them as the third co-founder.
And that's Julia, the current CEO of Eventbrite, right?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, great. It's still like the same setup.
Well, Kevin was the CEO first for about 10 years, and then he gave up his role and became executive chairman, and she took over.
And why did she actually live in the US? I mean, you're from Paris, right, originally?
I'm from France. I moved around a lot in France. I only lived in Paris when I was very little, but I've always loved Paris, and that's where I live now. I came back many times over the years. As we were building Eventbrite, I tried to be the spokesperson for the company in Europe. So I attended a lot of tech events, took part in a lot of accelerators and incubators, tried to bring back some of this Silicon Valley mentality back to Europe. And in doing so, I spent more and more time in Paris and really enjoyed the city.
Okay. And at first you bootstrapped Eventbrite, which was kind of unusual for that time, right? Or was it a typical thing to do?
I think it was more common then because there was less venture capital for early stage, I would say. Mm-hmm. But my co-founder had gone through fundraising for Zoom before, so he understood the complexity of it and what you needed to have in terms of traction and team size to be able to raise properly. And he had made some cash through Zoom, so he invested $250K in the company as the first check. And we lived on that for quite a while, actually. It was a pretty efficient setup. They were not taking any salaries. I was paid very little at the beginning. And we tried to make the best product we could with the least amount of resources we could spend.
So you were hustling for a while.
Exactly. I think being scrappy is definitely a virtue for a lot of companies. It brings creativity and you can do a lot with not very much, especially nowadays where there's so many different frameworks in technology stacks that allow you to build very quickly.
Well, I think if you do it today, like tech-wise, you have to really try to keep it simple, right? I mean, that was like easier back then, I assume. You just had like little choice in comparison to today, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we built a custom framework that was very basic. Had an data layer, data ORM type of thing that we had created. I think the entire site was one file at the time when we started, so very basic, no dependencies. I think today
sounds like a typical PHP project, or
no, it was a Python project.
Python, okay.
Yeah, we decided to go with Python early on. But yes, keeping it simple is both, I think, easier at the time because there were no frameworks. But harder now because you have a lot of power coming with all these frameworks and you need to set things up the right way, I think. But it's always the trick, I think, especially as you scale, to keep things simple, keep things manageable for one person to grasp. So that maybe one piece of advice for people on the call is to remember that as your number of engineers on your team grows, you still need them to be efficient and understand their domain in a very simple way. And that's hard to keep, I think, over time.
Absolutely. I also think I see a lot of B2B SaaS companies that are bootstrapped. What most of them really manage is to keep it simple because they don't have so many resources. And I like the idea of being frugal on different technologies. Even though I have to admit I did it wrong a few times, but that's how you learn, right?
Exactly. I think there's an art to keeping things simple. We have to resist the temptation of engineers wanting to explore the next new shiny object that's been launched, and it's so cool, but is it going to really help your users? Do they really care what you use in the backend? No, they don't. So think about your product first and your engineers second, because they're the ones who need to keep the momentum going and keep improving to deliver the customer value that you want to bring to the market.
Absolutely. Would you say that's also the responsibility of the CTO to manage the simplicity or complexity and kind of be the conservative person in the room?
I don't know if it's conservative. I think it's being very forward thinking in a way, because the company is going to expand. Your engineers don't really care. They're building product. They're not thinking what does the company look like in 5-10 years from now when you have hundreds of engineers coding away. So it's definitely your responsibility as a CTO or engineering leader to think about how you future-proof your code base, making sure it's well documented. For example, something we didn't do at all at the beginning. We just wrote code as fast as we could, didn't have any tests to validate that things were working as expected, didn't have any documentation. But then as we started adding people to the team, it became obvious that this was a really important area to invest in. And the longer you left it, the worse it would become. So at some point you have to bite the bullet, do the work you haven't done in the past, get up to par as to what is expected for new people joining the team to be as efficient as quickly as possible. And that's hard, I think, for companies that don't necessarily know that they're going to be around for 10 years. You just think about the next day when you're in startup mode, when it's just you coding, for example. Who cares about documenting my code? I understand it well. Why should I bother and waste precious time thinking about the future? But when you're in the future, then it becomes more obvious why you should have. So I think that's where experience really matters, and having the right people join the team at the right times to up-level the entire way you develop software.
When at Eventbrite, did you hire your first developer?
First developer was a friend of mine. I think it was 6 months after we started, but he was on a contract, didn't become an employee. We had a couple of these. We had an intern for a while. Again, bootstrapping, scrappy, picking people who were not too costly, first of all, and that were good enough to contribute. We did waste a lot of time, I think, not hiring senior people from the get-go. So if you're able to raise for a startup very early, I would recommend you hire as senior and talented as possible from the get-go. So it accelerates the path to product market fit in a big way if you do that. Mm-hmm. So don't follow our example, I would say.
Well, I think it also... as of today, I think in this remote first world, seniority became more important.
For sure. I don't think everybody is made to work in a remote environment. Yeah. Developers are a bit more like that because they like to be in the flow, in their bubble. So being isolated and at home, if you have the peace at home, which not everybody has, can be a great thing. But if you have kids running around and a house to manage, that becomes much harder. Yeah. So make sure people are senior in working from home if you hire working from home.
Did you do that at Eventbrite, or did that just switch with the mode of working just switch with Corona?
Well, it depended on the people. So we hired a few remote employees over the years. I was remote part of the time. I was splitting my time between Paris and San Francisco for quite a few years. And I always worked better from home in my little bubble, isolated from distractions, coffee breaks, fun chats with coworkers, and all the things that come with being in an office.
Yeah, but that all gets lost then, right? Or how do you see that?
No, I think you can maintain it, but you need the physical contact once in a while. So I would go regularly to the office, have coffee, have drinks, have dinners, have all the social elements of building a team together. Especially if you're a leader, I think you cannot be remote 100% of the time. Otherwise, you'll never build a very cohesive and team that bonds and gels in a way that office teams tend to build up.
Yeah. I mean, that's also the reason why events still exist, right? That you build trust in the real world typically. And that didn't really work out with virtual events during COVID from my perspective. I mean, you first thought, okay, this could be like a huge shift, but no, it's all back.
Yeah, we asked ourselves the question, I think, in a big way in the beginning of COVID when we lost a large part of our revenue. Physical events just didn't happen worldwide very quickly. And we had the option or the opportunity, I would say, to bet fully on remote events. We saw that there were many platforms that benefited from that. We could have gone this way, but we always felt that we were started as a company to bring people together in real life through live experiences. And having experienced online events ourselves, because that was the only way to engage at the very early days of COVID, we felt it was missing something. And it's not just the interface. I think just you don't have as much patience online. A 2-hour event is already a very long event, whereas in real life, when you have a variety of engagement, physical contact, physical formats that are much more conducive to multi-day events, for example, and much more enriching. I think our pyramid of needs has connectivity and social bonding as one of the base layer. And we wanted to stay the platform for live events, physically live, not just online live.
Yeah. I really can second that. Like we also with my other company OMR, we also went through that process of like canceling everything and realizing, okay, this is not going to happen at least this year, and we're not investing into like, or not fully investing into virtual events, but only do partly or parts of the event online.
I think the combination of big live events with some more focused online events can be very powerful for a brand that wants to engage with a global audience. Obviously. Definitely, you don't have to take a plane. It's much easier. You can lower the bar for accessibility, and everyone can profit, I think, from finding the right combination of formats that bring the most to the audience. But still, I think online events are just not as a quality and experience than physical events can be.
Yeah. And also the quality of networking after everyone invested so much time into traveling is I think also one of the positive side effects, right?
I've met so many friends in tech events, in physical tech events, by just going there and randomly bumping into someone who knows someone, having dinner with a bunch of unknowns, that I could see how online doesn't replicate that at all. And there's been many attempts of creating that social bonding layer online as well, but it's just not the same. You don't spend as much time. I see it on online events. Everybody logs off 5-10 minutes before the event ends. Nobody joins the networking sessions. Mm-hmm. And the networking sessions are harder to make vibrant because it depends highly on who's in the room and why you're there. versus just bumping into someone who's done something great at the coffee line at a tech conference.
Obviously. So with COVID happening back then, like describe that moment when you realized, okay, this is it for a while at least. Like, were you hesitant or?
I mean, I think we were unprepared, as many businesses were. Unprepared in how fast it became reality. I think we all were seeing in the tea leaves that something big was coming, because the news was quite dramatic, I would say, in how fast the virus was spreading. Maybe what we couldn't anticipate was the response of governments around the world shutting down everything and going into confinement so quickly. And it's very hard to future-proof your business when you don't have visibility or cannot plan years or months ahead. So we had to react, and we did react in a big way, I think, compared to other companies. We also had a major disadvantage in that we had part of our business is that we give ticket sales, we send ticket sales to the event organizers before the event happens. And we knew that with the shutdown of all the economies, a lot of event organizers would have to either refund their attendees or postpone their events, or could go bankrupt as a result of COVID. So we had 350 million, I think, in advances to event creators around the world that were at risk. So it was a big question mark. Are we going to lose the business because we didn't have 350 million in cash lying around for paying angry customers wanting their money back? So we did go into product building mode, trying to find the best way for event organizers to manage their cancellation, postponements. I think attendees were very understanding. They were all stuck at home and really wanted to go to these events. So they very much understood that the organizer postponed until the year after, for example. So in the end, we didn't have much loss linked to that, but we had to build a lot of product features. Attendee credits, for example, things, instead of sending them cash, we send them credits for buying the next event. We also had to reduce our workforce by 45%, and that happened in April 2020. So that's when I say we reacted quickly. That's the type of swift action we had to take. March 2020 was the realization, like, oh shit, something big is happening. We need to fix the business in order to survive. And then April, we had the layoffs, and I think by May, we had raised additional capital to be able to survive the loss of 90% of our revenue in 1 month.
Wow. But 10% was still there?
Stressful time.
10% was still there?
We already had some online event features. So they were mostly online events and events in places that were not impacted yet. And the virus didn't spread globally in one day. It took a while for some of the countries where we do business to actually be exposed to the pandemic.
Yeah, must have felt crazy. Like, was that the first time when you had to do layoffs, or?
Yeah, actually, it was the first time. We did some light ones at some point, but in this big way, for sure. I mean, only a cataclysmic event would have caused us to do that, because it's not the type of company we are. We care a lot about our employees, and we had to let go of very talented people, for sure. So it was not let's get rid of the non-performing employees. We had to change strategy, so to decide who to cut, and that was in an accelerated path because we didn't have much time.
And I mean, it's a hard topic, but do you have recommendations on how to prepare better? I mean, like a lot of people talk about recession these days. A lot of companies actually cut down on costs, let go a few employees. Any recommendation you would give, knowing that this could come?
Yes, for sure. I think I think having enough cash on hand to survive for 18, 24 months today is a necessity. Like, you don't know when your next round is going to come. The venture capital world has gone very cold and not taking as much risk for businesses that are maybe not growing as fast as others. So depending on your growth trajectory, I think being very conservative with cash is a must for businesses today. It's easier to do for a small business because you don't have much burn and you can predict pretty well how your growth curve is going to evolve. For much larger businesses, it's hard. Like if you're losing 50, 100 million a year and your growth numbers are not great, then raising a big C or D round might become very difficult.
Yeah, and your VCs maybe even cheered you to burn more quicker to
well, they did in 2021. But
yeah. And then all of a sudden, no one picks up the phone anymore.
Exactly. I had one company like that. They were about to raise their Series C and eventually went bankrupt because they couldn't afford the payroll anymore.
Yeah.
So cash is still the number one killer of startups. We shouldn't forget that.
And I think actually, I mean, you're now a venture partner at Point9, and Point9 is well known for their good SaaS investments. And I think, the SaaS world is kind of where reality just entered the room, right?
For sure. I think a different reality.
A different reality,
subjective.
Yeah.
I mean, you're in the SaaS business as well, so you know the drill. I think only the best platforms are able to raise from venture capital these days.
Yeah,
you need to have 3x growth over year in the early stage to be able to interest the venture world, because the public valuations have gone down so much that you need to be in the best of breed to expect being able to raise sufficient rounds from the top VCs, at least in SaaS. There's still a lot of space to be had in B2B. So I'm still bullish that there will be a lot of exciting companies coming out. But the expectations in terms of execution are much, much higher. And the VCs have time now because there's no like term sheet the next day type of deal anymore. Valuations have gone down. People are just more conservative, and that's a natural correction. I think that's probably healthy for the industry overall.
Maybe it's also good for coming back to tech. Maybe it's good for our species, right? Everyone these days, everyone wants to just do what the big techs are doing, like use, I don't know, Kubernetes, use single page web apps, use this and this and that, without ever thinking of the resources and resource usage you have and how many resources you actually waste. I think that will potentially be a mind shift now.
Well, I think the most forward companies are definitely thinking about their carbon footprint, if that's what you were referring to. I think there's waste in human resources needing to power those and handle the complexity that these technologies bring. But there's also the computational consumption that's more and more top of mind as companies, especially digital businesses, do their carbon footprint and realize that a lot of it is being spent on their servers. So I think we'll see a green conscience evolve in engineering as well. And it's not just going to be about the ROI on computational cost, but also on their overall footprint in the world. And the big tech is definitely on top of that. Like they're investing in, Google, for example, is investing in energy production. Green alternatives are coming online every day. But you have to think about that, I think, as a business today.
Yeah. Well, you have to, but Google, for example, I mean, employees still fly a lot, right? And I think that applies to all big techs. I mean, that changed a lot with Corona as well, but I don't know how.
I think they fly a lot, but still much less than they used to, and much less without thought. I mean, there's still some comfort, I think, from companies making billions in profit. But for your average company, I think that becomes a much bigger topic. how do you spend your carbon dollars, I would say. And you have to manage them just like any budget. So I think we'll see definitely tools that help companies think in those terms. What is the cost environmentally of each trip that I'm taking? And is it worth doing? Sometimes it is, for sure. You still have a business to run. You need that cohesion that comes from meeting in real life. But maybe you don't need to have all hands with your 1,000 employees in an exotic location for 7 days. Like the famous Uber parties that were happening in the past decade.
Like, honestly, I was more referring to like the technical ways that you have, but I find it quite an interesting topic. Like, do you personally track your CO2 consumption, or?
I've calculated it, and I know that it highly depends on mostly flights and transcontinental flights, especially. So I've tried to reduce as much as possible these, because they're 80% of your footprint if you're traveling a lot. That is the biggest saving you can have. After that, your home, your eating habits, and I definitely eat less meat. And I know in Germany it's a big trend, having a very pronounced reduction in animal consumption, and that's great. I think we're going to see that spread around the world.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a tool you used or an app you used that you recommend?
No, I haven't found the one that I love. There was a group that did that very informally, but I think it's still very complicated to calculate precisely. Like, it depends what you buy. Like new products, we tried to buy. We just had a baby, and 80% of the clothes that she's wearing are secondhand clothes. That has been a big revolution.
Babies never realize so.
But even for us, like we look at that first instead of looking at new.
So
there's really a consumer mind shift for sure. It's happening. People don't have blinders on. They understand that every action has a price to pay at some point.
But I think it's still happening quite slowly, right? I mean, there have been some wake up calls, I guess, but still, like.
Well, it's more. I think everybody is aware that it's happening and that their behavior has an impact on it. But changing behavior is always harder, for sure, especially when you're talking about what you eat every day. For example, that is a big one that requires a deeper commitment to the cause.
Obviously, but coming back to technology, I mean, you these days don't do lots of code, I guess, or don't code anymore at all. But do you still have, like, if you would start from scratch now, and you would start, let's say, a B2B SaaS, where would you start? Would you again start with like a Python script and keep it simple, or what would be your recommendation for the starting point?
I think, in the spirit of reducing complexity, and I would look at serverless technologies that remove the need to handle hardware. I mean, when we started, we had physical servers in a closet somewhere. And that was definitely a dependency we didn't need, a concern that weighs on you and prevents you from scaling. So there were many reasons why DevOps, I think, is becoming less and less something companies want to deal with. So we think about that. How can I go as long as possible with as little infrastructure as possible and still be able to handle scale much more easily than if I had control over the entire setup? I know it's not possible for some applications that require either specific hardware in AI, for example, or complex algorithm that costs immensely if you do it serverless way. But definitely I will look into that. I mean, there are a ton of frameworks out there. So think about which ones are the easiest one to understand for a new coder. If you are going to build a team that have the most common language behind them, and that do a lot more for you than others. I'm thinking of the Next frameworks or the Django. I mean, we use Django at Eventbrite, for example, and it's become so powerful, does so much for you in the back end that I would pick tried and tested technology for sure.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Django and like I'm a Rails person myself, and a few others like maybe Laravel in PHP became, let's say, a bit boring for developers, I think. But if you're really honest and you look at them and you try to really like, if you just want to build a web app, then maybe it's just enough. Maybe this boring piece of software that does a lot for you is just enough for most use cases, right?
I mean, I wouldn't pick entertainment factor as the main criteria for picking a framework. It's more about functionality. What does it do out of the box that you don't have to rewrite? How many connectors and interfaces it provides to all the other components you need to bring into the mix. And there, it's hard to beat the boring platforms that have been around for 10 plus years and that have built tremendous support for the entire tech stack that you can be thinking about having versus a new language that has, 3 database layers that you can connect to. And you will have to write the next one, which will be a big investment for no return.
Yeah, well, but that's how you also started, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think, but it didn't exist at the time. And Django was in version 0.1, I think, when we started, so it was not usable.
For sure, yeah, I think it really, like, there are some ecosystems around that changed so much that it really is hard to keep up, right? Like the whole Node ecosystem and all the dependencies that you can introduce there potentially. It's like, for me, always a nightmare to step into that. But I think it's also like, maybe I'm old.
That's the downside of complexity and the profusion of things that have been written for these frameworks, that you have to be very picky about the ones you actually use.
Absolutely. So I understood you wouldn't go bare metal again, right? But back then there was no choice, I assume. Was there like
I mean, if I was doing Bitcoin mining, I would probably go to bare metal. That's still how you extract the most ROI from your investment. But otherwise, no. And dealing with hardware is something I don't know many developers who enjoy that part.
Yeah.
Some do, and that's great that we have them. But it's a complexity that you don't really need, especially as you're starting your business.
Yeah, the thrills of understanding that there's just a broken switch somewhere or a broken cable. Yeah, that is what many also don't remember, right? Yeah. Well, it is. On the other hand, like, there recently has been like lots of discussions around the efficiency of the cloud, right? If you see what you can do with a cloud machine versus like a real consumer CPU, it differs by a lot. I mean, you have the simplicity of the cloud.
I think when you get to massive scale and the cost of your computation becomes a much greater percentage of your revenue, then it makes sense, I think, potentially to go back to bare metal, understanding that you'll have to offset that saving with many more people internally to manage all that. Yeah. But true, at Google scale, you have your own bare metal or your own data centers.
Yeah. There was recently like a discussion kicked off by David Heinemeier Hansen, the Rails inventor, and he said that they are moving back to bare metal for Basecamp. But I think for that maturity, like as long as you or as soon as you let's say have over 2, 3, 4 million in revenue, it might make sense to consider that, even if but you have to be realistic on the total cost of ownership, right?
Yeah, I would say more 100 million than 2 or 3 million.
You would say more 100 million? I think they're not there.
No, I don't think they are. So I don't know if it makes sense. It's up to them.
I don't know. Yeah, it's up to them.
They're about optimizing the business at this point. They're not about growing from VCs. They decided to go the self-funded route. So it makes sense to rationalize the costs.
Yeah, well, I mean, Kubernetes exists for bare metal as well, right? I mean, you can essentially build your own cloud, and it's okay effort-wise, but still, like having to maintain that all, and having to maintain, I don't know, an Elasticsearch server somewhere or a cluster somewhere. That's even harder, right?
It's possible, but
it's possible.
A choice. Has to be a very conscious choice that has implications over the long term that you need to modelize if you're going to go that route.
Yeah, obviously. We just did like a bigger article around the topic after David pulled out his one. Like happy to publish it maybe at the same time as the podcast. Looking forward to that. But well, like maybe like the last questions from my end. Like, was there ever a moment at Eventbrite, and I don't know if you really acted as CTO when COVID hit the company? I mean, you went through like a long journey at Eventbrite from 2006 to then like 2019, 20. Was there ever a moment when you realized, okay, maybe I'm not needed anymore, or like I'm just guessing?
I think any good CTO should want to not be there anymore. In a way that they organize the teams and put the thought process in place to make sure you have the right people in the right place below you. So that's what I tried to do. I wasn't CTO at COVID anymore because I wanted to explore investment, and as part of the deal, I couldn't manage the team anymore. Mm-hmm. But until then, until 2018, I was definitely hands-on, thinking about what is the next big project I can run instead of just doing management. I think what ends up happening with a lot of founder CTOs is they do all the technical work at the beginning, and then as the team scales, they start doing more and more management, strategy, organizing teams, and that's fine for some. But I always like building, and I always found it more impactful for me to spend time on whatever the next big project we had was. So that's how I evolved in the organization, by every 6 months, 1 year, picking whatever was the biggest hurdle to our growth that I could solve with a small team. And I would pick that small team. Internationalization is a good example. The framework we had built and launched Eventbrite on wasn't internationalizable. So we had to do a lot of work in 2010 when we decided we were going to launch in Europe to make this possible, to have a site in French, a site in German, with all the complexity that comes with it. Part of it was moving to Django, which we did, and that was in itself a very heavy effort. But then there was all the string extractions, the automation of the translations, and taxes, and all these other features that we had to build to have an MVP for each country. So that's why I decided to spend time on. More recently, in the last few years, we realized that we needed to diversify our revenue. Until then, we were very purely transactional. A ticket is sold on Eventbrite for a price. We take a commission. That's our business model. We wanted to introduce some recurring revenue. So we looked at all the potential other fields that we could build software on, and ended up picking event marketing as one of the options. So we built a suite of tools. We acquired a company that was doing event marketing and bundled that into a SaaS offering for event organizers. So there's always, I think, these large projects that a CTO wants to remain hands-on and not be purely managing, can spend time on. And those are, I think, the nuggets that enable the company to go further and are equally important as to how well you manage your team.
But then there was like all of a sudden a moment when you realized, okay, this is not for me anymore, or?
Yeah, I think after we survived COVID and we had a lot of turnover on the team. We hired aggressively once COVID passed, and we were sound on the financial side. We started bringing on board very talented people, our new CTO, new CPO, new management team, experienced engineers also came from large tech. At the end of 2021, I realized that maybe I didn't have it in me to spend the next 3 or 4 years on Eventbrite topics anymore. I think I had exhausted my interest for the space and my value inside the company, because I was coding less and less. I was investing on the side more and more as an angel. I was working with venture funds, and I decided that's what I wanted to do full time. So it made sense for me to step down and go do something else. And 16 years is a long time already, I think.
So if I ask you for 3 tips for our listeners, then maybe that would be one of your tips, like don't stick around too long, or?
I don't think it's don't stick around too long. It's find your value inside a growing organization. And sometimes it's not being attached to titles, I think can be harmful. It's much more important to be fulfilled and working on things you really enjoy, rather than keeping a title for posterity's sake and being miserable every day because you hate managing people. I see way too many founders who pigeonhole themselves into not doing what they love. And that's a bit sad. Like as a founder, especially, you have a choice as to what you spend your time on. And I think you should think about, how can I bring the most value to my company every day? And that's something I tell all the founders I invest in. Like, if you're not a CEO for this company, like realize it quickly so you can hire the right person. You're first and foremost a shareholder. And as a shareholder, you should think about what's best for the business, and make that compatible with what you love doing. And we know life is short, especially after COVID made us realize that sickness can come at any time and strike. So being very thoughtful about what you spend your time on, finding the right balance between work and life has always been something I've put a lot of emphasis on, and Eventbrite especially puts a lot of emphasis on.
Okay, great.
I have many other tips, but for many things.
Yeah, I think that's that's a very good one. So I think it's fair to leave with that.
On the tech side, I would say not chasing the bright shiny stars all the time, because that's detrimental. I've seen it happen too many times at Eventbrite as well, where new engineers didn't want to learn the old framework, wanted to introduce theirs. So the new thing got built in some language that nobody knew. And then 1 year later, they left, and we're left with this piece of software nobody wants to handle. And that happens so frequently that it makes me sad.
Yeah. Do you know anyone who can code Elixir?
Exactly. Who wants to learn? No.
Okay. Did you recently like I see myself like often having those wow moments with tech again. Was there like a moment recently in your life when you said, "This is possible, really?" Like, and you discovered something crazy, or?
I think it's software. The chat GPT is quite amazing.
Yeah, obviously.
I ask questions all the time now, like, just to see what the common wisdom is. I think that's how we should use them for now.
Yeah.
We're not specialized enough, but it's pretty amazing, the articulation of the concepts that the AI is able to produce, especially in a conversational manner. It really feels like humans now. I know it's not, but it opens, I think, a lot of opportunity for better software to be built, especially in the B2B space. I think we've barely used AI in making things that are obvious automated, for example, and make software that's really intelligent and not forcing every time you switch to a new platform to enter many things through forms when you could deduct it from intelligence. So I hope we see a next generation of software that takes advantage of that. Yeah. And then on more sciencey type of projects, I invest a lot more in climate tech these days, and the creativity there is pretty amazing. People bring in technologies from biotech, applying it to how they transform algae to feed cows so they have less methane emissions. I mean, you see pretty crazy projects out there, which makes me hopeful we can find a cure to climate change somehow through technology.
Yeah, I'm hopeful there as well. Like I hope that doesn't count as being naive if you believe in tech so much that you think it can partly be solved through this.
I mean, it's obviously not the solution. I think it's definitely part of the solution. It needs to be a combination of political changes, behavior changes, and incentivization of the right technologies to be deployed as quickly as possible. But a lot of these technologies already exist. If you look at agriculture, there's a McKinsey report that outlines exactly how we could reduce the footprint of agriculture by a factor of, I forget, 10x or something like that. Wow. With existing technology, not with new technology.
Wow. That's crazy. So then we come to my closing surprise for you. One thing I just found out, and actually Julia, your co-founder, told me at Eventbrite, you can use the search of Eventbrite with the term @time_machine and followed by a name and a year. To travel back in time, actually, through your mighty, mighty script that you wrote back then. Yeah, you can try it out, and I tried it out, and we can now test it. We can give it a try and travel back, enter time machine, Renaud, and 2006, the year you just got started with Eventbrite. And we now observe yourself for a while, like coding day and night, crazy times. And you now have the chance to whisper something into young Renaud's ears. What would it be?
It's a good question. I think it would be to think more about the future and less about the present. We spent a lot of time thinking about the next feature and all of that, and to the detriment, I think, of making a platform that could scale very easily for the next engineers that joined. We lost a lot of time along the way, I think, in upgrading everything to be compatible with a large team. But also to think big. I think it was a project at the beginning. We were maybe expecting something big could happen, but also very pragmatic about not getting too excited. And maybe if we had been more ambitious then, we could have hired better and scaled faster in a way. But I mean, we had the trajectory we had, took 16 years. Some other businesses took less. And I'm still very excited about the event technology space. I think there's a lot to build there. And I hope Eventbrite is the platform that will build all these wow moments for people going to events.
Thanks a lot, Renaud. That was great. Like lots of learnings, and hope to see you again soon. Maybe in real life as well.
I hope so.
And looking forward to our next discussion.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me.
Have a great day. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the AlphaList podcast. If you like this episode, share it with friends. I'm sure they love it too. Make sure to subscribe so you can hear deep insights into technical leadership and technology trends as they become available. Also, please tell us if there is a topic you would like to hear more about or a technical leader whose brain you would like us to pick. AlphaList is all about helping CTOs getting access to the insights they need to make the best decisions for their company. Please send us suggestions to cto@alphalist.com. Send me a message on LinkedIn or Twitter. After all, the more knowledge we bring to CTOs, the more growth we see in tech. Or, as we say on AlphaList, accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth. See you in the next episode.